All right, referential integrity. So this process that we just talked about too. So let's just review a little bit on the normalization. If you're thinking about, oh, where do I start? You can use the third normal form, first, second, and third normal form, to try to look at the content that you have in your spreadsheet or in your unnormalized data table, and start with like, all right, how can I create this environment, this object modeling that we were talking about earlier, to create this environment that allows us to have this data and implement that cleaner environment by using the third normal up to the third normal form. Referential integrity is what we use to get those tables to talk to each other. So now I've got three tables. Brian, it sounds like it was a lot easier to have one table because they were all in one spot. Granted, it may have been easier for that piece, but what we're going to be able to do with this content when we kind of slice and dice it, as we're going to see in a couple modules, is really blows away the idea of what we can do now with when we're in an Excel spreadsheet and we can go to the top and we can click the column header and sort of ascending versus descending. We're going to have a lot more we can do with that. So that's the good news. Referential integrity is getting those columns, those tables, to talk to each other. So this includes, or you'll see this referential integrity is RI. It's a concept to ensure that you have relationships between the tables that we just created. RI can ensure that the data is clean, and it makes sure that data that we're adding is valid data. So not only have we separated content out, we've now created an environment that's going to enforce that when I'm adding data, it's going to be valid data. And we're going to do that by introducing what are called primary keys and foreign keys. So if we go back to, let's go back, I'm going to go back a couple slides here. If we go back to here, our student number is a primary key, we'll say. And what I can do is I can have it, or is a foreign key. And my bad again, my registration has a student number on it, and it also has a students over here in this table here. So we're both using 1022. So what we're going to do is we're going to reference one table to the other table. One table will have the primary key, and one table will have the foreign key. So the foreign key is used to validate the content or the value that I'm adding is a valid value. Kind of sounds a little bit redundant, but it's not. So if I'm using the students, my registration, when I go to register, it's going to look at 10022. When I enter in, if I typed in 1021, it's going to bebop over because that's a foreign key over to the students here. It's going to jump over there and say, there is no 1021. So not only does it enforce the referential integrity, it enforces that we're adding valid content by making sure a student 1022 exists or a student 1021 exists before it allows me to add content. So not are we gaining the normalization of having the ability to slice and dice, it's actually performing data integrity by ensuring that I'm adding content that's valuable. So if there was no student 1021, and I try to add content into registration, it's going to say, dude, I can't work with you because there's no student 1021. But being there is a student 1022, when they register for classes, it's going to check to see student 1022 exist in the students table. It's going to also check to see who the advisor is. And if there's information that we need about the advisor, we're going to be able to write query select statements to be able to retrieve that content. So that's the idea of primary keys and foreign keys and allowing us to be able to reference the content between tables. That's that referential integrity to get us the ability to kind of double check or cross check with the tables that are involved to make sure that the content that we're adding is valid and to make sure that we're able to retrieve this content as we move on down the road and we look at some of the select statements. Now, we'll talk more about this when we start looking at the keys, but with these keys involved, we can only have one primary key on a table. And there may be other cross checks that I want to perform to make sure they're valid. So we can also apply what's called a unique constraint or a unique key constraint. What this does for us is allows us to not only just do a cross check on an individual column with the associated or composite key, associated primary key, but also I can do cross checks on what are called unique. And what that does is enforce uniqueness for us. Triggers can be used to enforce referential integrity as well. They require some code. A trigger example would be every time I insert a column, it may be as simple as send an email to the advisor saying that there's a new student that's been assigned to you. So it could be that simple. When a certain action takes place, that trigger performs tasks or multiple tasks. It could be as simple as sending an email to the advisor saying, student now 1057 has been assigned to you, so they receive an email saying that they have another student that may show up at their door looking for some assistance when it comes to the performing the advisor role. So that's referential integrity. Pete, anything you want to add to that?
You kind of just blew my mind again. I'm going to just back up.
I got to quit talking.
You went all the way to triggers and what happens with respect to referential integrity. When something is added to a table, you can invoke a trigger, which invokes functionality. And I'm still thinking about my CD library. I'm trying to imagine how that's going to come into play. So that's another super advanced topic. We're gonna get a little bit in the next couple of modules. We're going to talk about some of the functionality you can do in a database management system where you can actually invoke some of the code, some programmatic code on an event or a trigger on a database. But I think we're going to get into a demo here in a minute where we'll be able to summarize some of this. But I think normalization, pretty complicated, because I went from a whole bunch of columns in a single thing to a whole bunch of smaller pieces that have fewer columns.
Right.
So I kind of understand that, even though we're not going to talk about creating tables, like actually creating a table. We're going to talk about in the next module.
Right.
But now conceptually, I get the idea that I take this unnormalized collection of data, which is my CD library, or your original example of the inventory was a good one with a whole bunch of products and a whole bunch of metadata or columns about the product on a shelf at a grocery store, right? I can see how I might break that down by brand, or I might break that down by category. Category seems to be a common thread across all of these examples, which is pretty good, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But it gives us a logical way to put things together so that they're in discrete pieces where I'm going to be able to, I think, use them in a smart way to answer different questions about my data that I have a really hard time with in this sort of unnormalized spreadsheet-like view.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
definitely.
Yeah, I'm tracking you.
Good recap, definitely.
Yeah. But triggers, seriously, triggers is like 300 level.
Yeah.
So let's keep it on the level.
So we'll keep it. We'll keep it. I just want to introduce the fact there are ways, there are tasks, including triggers, that can be used to enforce referential integrity. We won't get that deep in this class, but they are out there for us. All right. So methods for enforcing referential integrity. We just introduced primary key, foreign key, unique constraint, indexes. We haven't talked about yet, and triggers. Here's the idea of a composite key. So I may have a column. I may have a table that, for instance, let's say we have a table that contains driver's license. And if I go in and my driver's license for Arizona is BR549, if anybody remembers that reference to something that's an old TV show. Anyways, if my driver's license is BR549 and I live in Arizona and Pete's driver's license is also BR549, how can we make that a unique key in a table? We can't by itself, but what we can do is include another column called issuing state. So now my composite key would be BR549AZ, his would be BR549WA. So now those two together makes that data unique. Okay, so that's what a composite key. The primary key has to be unique. It may not be possible by doing it with that one column. So we may have to use multiple columns. If we use more than two columns or more, it's considered a composite key. All right, so if you see that, because sometimes you might see where it says something about having a primary key is like, well, it's got 3 columns. Well, in order to enforce uniqueness, we need 3 columns. So that's what that's alluding to when you see that composite key option here.